Sometimes the people we look down upon are the ones holding the power to save us. Michael had driven thousands of passengers in his 3 years as an Uber driver. He had been insulted, dismissed, and treated like he was invisible. But on this cold Sunday night in downtown Chicago, one ride would shatter everything a man believed about success, power, and what truly matters. In the span of 1 hour, a desperate father would learn that the person he spent 30 minutes humiliating was the only one who could save his dying daughter's life.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing.
The notification pinged on Michael's phone at 9:47 p.m. A pickup request from the financial district. 5-star rating required. Luxury ride requested, but defaulted to standard due to availability. Michael accepted it. After 3 years of driving for Uber, he had learned not to expect much from late Sunday night pickups in this part of the city. The business crowd was either pretentious or drunk, sometimes both. He pulled his Toyota Camry up to the address, a gleaming 40-story office building with gold-trimmed revolving doors. Through the glass, he could see a man in an expensive suit gesturing aggressively at someone on his phone, while a young woman sat on a lobby bench, her face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. The man burst through the doors first, barely glancing at Michael before yanking open the rear door. He barked into his phone, something about quarterly reports and incompetent subordinaries, before sliding into the back seat. The young woman followed slowly, moving as if every step required tremendous effort. She offered Michael a weak smile, before settling beside her father. Michael checked his mirror. The man was in his mid-30s, sharp-featured, with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from never being told no. His daughter looked about 10 years younger, fragile, in a way that seemed more than just physical exhaustion. He started the engine and pulled into traffic without a word. The address in his GPS showed a hospital on the north side, about 25 minutes away in current traffic. 3 minutes into the ride, the man finally looked up from his phone and wrinkled his nose. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with contempt. The man made a show of examining the interior of the car, running his finger along the door handle as if checking for dust. He muttered something about downgrading expectations and having to ride in what he called a glorified taxi because all the premium drivers were apparently busy. Michael said nothing. His hands remained steady on the wheel, his expression neutral in the rearview mirror. He had developed this skill over years of driving, the ability to become wallpaper, to let insults bounce off him like rain off glass. The man returned to his phone call, but his voice grew louder, clearly performing now for an audience of two. He spoke about a business deal he had closed that week, bragging about how he had outmaneuvered a competitor. He mentioned numbers in the millions, dropped names of people he golfed with, described his corner office view. Between his boasts, he would pause to make comments clearly directed at Michael. He wondered aloud what it must be like to have no ambition, to spend your days driving other people to their important destinations while having none of your own. He mused about the gig economy and how it was filled with people who couldn't make it in the real world. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She whispered for her father to stop, but the man, Derek, waved her off. He told her this was educational, that she needed to see the difference between people who built empires and people who served those empire builders. Michael adjusted his mirror slightly. Sarah met his eyes for a brief moment, and he saw the apology there, the shame. He gave her the smallest nod, letting her know it was okay, that he had heard worse. Derek continued his lecture, now addressing his daughter directly while ensuring his voice carried to the front seat. He talked about the importance of ruthless ambition, about how the world was divided into winners and losers, and how you had to decide early which one you would be. He said that mediocrity was a choice, that people who ended up in service jobs had simply given up on being anything more. The traffic thickened as they approached a construction zone. Michael smoothly navigated the lane mergers, his driving calm and precise. Derek barely noticed, too engrossed in his own monologue. He began talking about his company, one of the rising stars in medical technology sales. He described how he had climbed the ranks by being willing to do what others wouldn't, by prioritizing results over relationships. He bragged about the deals he had stolen from competitors, the colleagues he had outmaneuvered for promotions. Then he circled back to Michael, as if unable to resist. He asked Sarah if she understood why education mattered, why networking mattered, why pedigree mattered. He gestured toward the driver's seat and said that this was what happened when you had none of those things. You became invisible, a footnote in other people's success stories. Michael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained calm and professional when he spoke. He informed them that they were 15 minutes from the hospital and asked if they needed him to take any specific entrance. Derek scoffed at the question, asking if Michael could even read the GPS properly. He made a joke about whether Uber drivers needed to pass any actual competency tests or if anyone with a car could do this job. Sarah's voice, weak but insistent, cut through her father's tirade. She asked him to please stop, that she didn't feel well. Derek's expression softened fractionally when he looked at his daughter, but he brushed off her concern. He told her they were almost there, that she just needed to hold on a little longer, that once they got her treatment, she would be fine. He returned his attention to his phone, scrolling through emails. Without looking up, he continued his commentary, now comparing his daughter's illness to business challenges. He said that life was about pushing through adversity, about not letting obstacles stop you. He seemed to be building towards some kind of motivational point, but it came across as hollow, a rehearsed speech that had lost its meaning through repetition. Michael turned onto a wider boulevard, the hospital now visible in the distance, its lit windows standing out against the dark sky. The traffic had thinned, and he increased speed slightly, still maintaining perfect smoothness. Derek glanced up from his phone and made another comment about the car, asking Michael how much he made in a night, whether it was even worth the gas and insurance costs. He wondered aloud if people like Michael ever did the math, or if they just drifted through life without planning, without strategy. The young woman's breathing had become slightly labored. Michael noticed it in his mirror, the way her chest rose and fell with more effort than it should. Derek noticed nothing, still absorbed in his phone and his own voice. Michael asked, his tone still professional, if Sarah was feeling all right. Derek snapped that she was fine, that Michael should focus on driving and leave the medical assessments to people who actually knew what they were talking about. But Sarah's condition was deteriorating. Her face had gone from pale to gray, and a thin sheen of sweat covered her forehead, despite the cool air conditioning. She leaned her head against the window, her eyes closing. Derek finally looked at his daughter properly. For the first time since entering the car, his expression showed nothing other than arrogance, concern, quickly morphing into alarm. He called her name, his voice sharp with sudden fear. Sarah didn't respond. Her body had gone limp against the door, her breathing shallow and rapid. Derek's entire demeanor transformed in an instant. The powerful executive vanished, replaced by a terrified father. He grabbed his daughter's shoulders, calling her name louder now, almost shouting. He looked up at Michael, his eyes wide with panic, and his voice cracked as he demanded that Michael get them to the hospital immediately. Everything Derek believed about control was about to shatter. The man who had spent 30 minutes proving his superiority was seconds away from begging for help from the person he had treated as worthless. And Michael, the invisible driver, was about to become the only thing standing between a father and his worst nightmare.
Michael's response was immediate and controlled. He didn't panic, didn't waste time with questions. He accelerated smoothly, his eyes scanning the road ahead for the fastest route. He told Derek, his voice calm but authoritative, to lay Sarah down across the back seat with her head elevated on his lap. Derek fumbled with his daughter, his hand shaking, trying to position her as instructed. He kept calling her name, his voice breaking, begging her to wake up, to stay with him. Michael asked specific questions while navigating through traffic with practiced precision. He asked when Sarah had last eaten, whether she had taken any medication, what her current symptoms had been before she lost consciousness. His tone had changed completely, no longer the passive driver accepting insults. This was someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Derek, too frightened to notice the shift, answered rapidly. Sarah had eaten little that day. She had been feeling weak all week. She had multiple medications, but he wasn't sure which ones she had taken today. He was supposed to be taking her to a regular checkup, but she had gotten worse suddenly. Michael ran a red light, timing it perfectly to avoid cross-traffic, shaving precious seconds off their journey. He instructed Derek to check Sarah's pulse, to monitor her breathing, to talk to her even if she couldn't respond. His directions were clear and precise, spoken with the confidence of someone who had medical training. Derek obeyed without question, his earlier arrogance completely forgotten. He pressed his fingers to Sarah's wrist, counting her heartbeats, his own heart racing with terror. He leaned close to her face, feeling her breath against his cheek, reassuring himself that she was still breathing. The hospital was now 5 minutes away, but 5 minutes felt like an eternity. Derek pulled out his phone with shaking hands, trying to dial his doctor, his contacts, anyone who could help. The phone slipped from his grasp twice before he managed to make a call. He shouted into the phone that his daughter was unconscious, that they were minutes away from the hospital, that he needed a team ready immediately. The person on the other end asked questions, but Derek couldn't focus, couldn't remember details. His mind had gone blank with fear. Michael spoke up, his voice cutting through Derek's panic. He asked to speak to the hospital. Derek, too desperate to question, handed the phone forward. Michael took it without taking his eyes off the road, tucking it between his shoulder and ear. He identified himself and provided a rapid clinical assessment of Sarah's condition. He listed symptoms, vitals as far as Derek had reported them, and an estimated time of arrival. He spoke in medical terminology, precise and professional, like someone who had done this hundreds of times. The person on the other end responded with equal professionalism, and Michael confirmed they would have a team ready at the emergency entrance. He handed the phone back to Derek, who took it numbly, staring at this driver as if seeing him for the first time. But there was no time for questions. Sarah's breathing had become more labored, her lips taking on a blue tinge. Derek saw this and felt his world tilt. He begged Michael to go faster, to do something, his voice raw with desperation. Michael was already pushing the car to its limits, but safely, professionally. He wove through traffic with precision, his hand steady on the wheel. He told Derek to keep talking to Sarah, to keep her engaged, even if she couldn't respond, that the sound of his voice might help keep her conscious. Derek bent over his daughter, whispering to her, telling her to hold on, that they were almost there, that she was going to be okay. Tears streamed down his face, falling onto Sarah's pale cheeks. He stroked her hair, his hand trembling, and told her he loved her, that she had to fight, that he needed her. The hospital came into view, its emergency entrance lit up like a beacon. Michael didn't slow down until the last possible moment, then brought the car to a smooth, controlled stop directly in front of the doors. Before the car had fully stopped, he was out and opening the back door. A team of medical personnel rushed out with the gurney. Michael helped Derek extract Sarah from the back seat, supporting her weight with surprising strength. He transferred her to the gurney with practice ease, rattling off her condition to the medical team in that same professional terminology. The team whisked Sarah away, Derek stumbling after them, his world narrowed to nothing but his daughter's pale face disappearing through the emergency room doors. He had forgotten about Michael entirely, forgotten about everything except the terror of potentially losing his child. Michael parked his car properly and walked into the hospital. He didn't end the ride in his app. He stood in the emergency waiting room, hands in his pockets, his expression calm but focused. 20 minutes passed. Derek sat in a plastic chair, his head in his hands, his expensive suit rumpled, his phone forgotten on the seat beside him. He had called his ex-wife, Sarah's mother, who was on her way from the suburbs. He had called his assistant to cancel all his meetings for the week. He had called no one else because there was no one else, he realized. In his climb to success, he had burned almost every bridge, prioritized business over relationships. A doctor emerged, and Derek leapt to his feet. The doctor's expression was serious but not grave. Sarah had stabilized. She was conscious but weak. They were running tests, but it appeared to be a severe reaction related to her underlying condition. The doctor asked about Sarah's medical history, her medications, her recent symptoms before she lost consciousness. Derek answered as best he could, but he realized with growing horror how little he actually knew. He had been so focused on his work, on his climb up the corporate ladder, that he had delegated his daughter's care to others, his ex-wife, nannies, assistants. He knew about the illness in broad strokes. She needed a transplant, they were on a waiting list, but the details escaped him. The doctor's expression grew more concerned, asking specific questions that Derek couldn't answer. He felt small, inadequate, a failure as a father. All his success, all his money, all his connections meant nothing if he couldn't even properly care for his own daughter. Michael stepped forward. He had been standing quietly against the wall, unnoticed. He spoke to the doctor, asking if he could provide some information. The doctor turned to him, clearly assuming he was a family member. Michael described symptoms that Sarah had exhibited in the car, observations that Derek had been too panicked to notice or remember. He mentioned that she had been rubbing her left side, suggesting possible pain in her kidney area. He noted the specific pattern of her breathing, the color changes in her complexion, the way she had been moving before losing consciousness. The doctor listened intently, nodding, making notes. This information was helpful, potentially crucial. He thanked Michael and returned to the examination rooms. Derek stared at Michael, really seeing him for the first time. This man that he had spent 30 minutes belittling had potentially just provided information that could help save Sarah's life. This Uber driver had shown more competence and composure in a crisis than Derek had, despite all Derek's supposed superiority. Derek was about to discover that the worthless driver he had humiliated wasn't just competent in a crisis. The truth about who Michael really was would turn Derek's worldview upside down and force him to confront the ugliest parts of himself. But first, Michael had a decision to make: reveal his identity or let this father continue suffering in ignorance.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Derek approached Michael slowly, his earlier confidence stripped away, leaving only exhaustion and shame. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. What could he possibly say? Thank you felt inadequate after how he had behaved. Michael saved him from the awkward moment by asking if Derek wanted coffee. The hospital cafeteria was closed, but there were vending machines down the hall. Derek nodded mutely and followed. They walked in silence, Derek's expensive shoes clicking against the linoleum floor, Michael's worn sneakers making almost no sound. The hospital was quiet at this hour, just the distant sounds of machines beeping and the occasional page over the intercom. Michael fed dollar bills into the vending machine and punched the button for 2 black coffees. He handed one to Derek, who took it with both hands, as if he needed something to hold on to. Derek finally found his voice. He started to apologize, the words tumbling out in a rush. He said that he had been wrong, that there was no excuse for how he had spoken, that he was grateful, so grateful for what Michael had done. His voice broke and he pressed his palm against his eyes, trying to hold back tears. Michael sipped his coffee and waited. He didn't make it easy, didn't offer platitudes or quick forgiveness. He just waited. Derek continued. He explained that he had been under incredible stress, that Sarah's condition had been deteriorating for months, that they had been on a transplant list for over a year with no match. He talked about his divorce, about how his obsession with work had destroyed his marriage. He admitted that he barely knew his own daughter anymore, that he had been so focused on building his career that he had missed her growing up. The words poured out, a confession from a man who had no one else to tell. Derek described how he measured his worth by his job title, his salary, his corner office. He said that he had believed that success justified everything, that achieving greatness meant you could look down on those who hadn't. But in that back seat, watching his daughter slip away, none of it had mattered. His money couldn't save her. His connections couldn't wake her up. His achievements meant nothing. Michael listened, his expression unreadable. When Derek finally ran out of words, sitting on a bench with his coffee growing cold between his hands, Michael spoke. He said that everyone had their own journey, their own reasons for the choices they made. He said that judging others based on their current circumstances was a failure of imagination, because you never knew the full story. He said that the person serving you coffee might be working 3 jobs to put themselves through medical school. The janitor might be a retired engineer who found peace in simple work. The Uber driver might be something else entirely. Derek looked up at that, hearing something in Michael's tone. He asked, hesitantly, if Michael had medical training. Michael smiled slightly. He said he had some experience with emergency situations, that he had learned to stay calm under pressure. He didn't elaborate. They sat in silence for a while, drinking bad hospital coffee under harsh fluorescent lights. Derek's phone buzzed repeatedly with work emails, but he ignored it. For the first time in years, something was more important than his job. A nurse approached them, informing Derek that Sarah was awake and asking for him. Derek stood so quickly he almost dropped his coffee. He turned to Michael, thanking him again, his voice thick with emotion. He said he would never forget what Michael had done. Michael nodded and said he was glad Sarah was going to be okay. He turned to leave, but Derek called after him. He asked for Michael's contact information, said he wanted to properly compensate him for everything, that the Uber fare was obviously not enough. Michael waved off the offer. He said Derek should focus on his daughter, that the fare was already settled in the app. He started walking toward the exit. But then a voice called out across the hospital lobby. A woman in a white coat, the hospital's chief administrator, was hurrying toward them. She called out a name, Michael Chen. Derek's brow furrowed. Chen. That name was familiar, but he couldn't place it. The administrator reached them, slightly out of breath. She spoke to Michael with a level of deference that seemed out of place for an Uber driver. She asked if everything was all right, if there was anything the hospital could do for him. She mentioned that if he had called ahead, they could have prepared. Michael, looking slightly uncomfortable, assured her that everything was fine, that he was just helping a passenger. He tried to politely extract himself from the conversation. But the administrator continued, mentioning something about the new wing that his family's foundation had funded, asking if his father would be attending the dedication ceremony next month. Derek's eyes widened. Foundation, family. He looked at Michael with new understanding beginning to dawn. But it didn't make sense. Michael was an Uber driver. He was wearing jeans and a simple jacket. He drove a Camry. The administrator finally noticed Derek and apologized for interrupting. She mentioned that they would take excellent care of his daughter, that any friend of the Chen family would receive their absolute best care. Derek's blood ran cold. Chen family. The Chen family. The name clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Robert Chen was one of the wealthiest men in America, the founder and CEO of TechMed Solutions, the largest medical technology company in the country. TechMed wasn't just big, it was a giant that dominated the entire industry. And Derek's company, MedTech Innovations, where he was so proud to be a senior vice president, was a distant competitor, barely a blip on TechMed's radar. But more than that, Derek remembered now. 6 months ago, his company had tried to poach several key engineers from TechMed. They had failed, and rumors had circulated that Robert Chen himself had personally intervened, making offers that MedTech couldn't match. Derek had spent weeks complaining about the unfairness of it, about how the rich got richer while smaller companies couldn't compete. He had ranted at company meetings about Robert Chen, called him a monopolist, said he represented everything wrong with American capitalism.
He had made it personal, even though he had never met the man. And now, Derek slowly turned to look at Michael. Really look at him. The resemblance was there if you knew what to look for. The same sharp features, the same intense eyes. His voice came out as barely a whisper. He asked if Michael was Robert Chen's son. Michael's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. He confirmed it, simply, without elaboration or boast. Yes, Robert Chen was his father. Derek felt the floor tilt beneath him. He had spent half an hour insulting, belittling, and humiliating the son of one of the most powerful men in America. Worse, he had insulted him while his daughter was in medical crisis, and now that same man had potentially saved Sarah's life and definitely had the connections to help her. The administrator, sensing the tension, excused herself. Before she left, she reminded Michael that he should let the staff know if he needed anything at all. After she left, Derek couldn't look at Michael. Shame burned through him, worse than before. It was one thing to apologize for being rude to an Uber driver. It was another thing entirely to realize he had been rude to someone who could, with a single phone call, change his entire life, for better or for worse. Michael could see the calculation happening in Derek's mind, and his expression hardened slightly. He said, his voice cool, that Derek didn't need to worry. He wasn't going to call his father, wasn't going to use any influence to hurt Derek's career. That wasn't who he was. But Derek's nightmare was just beginning, because Michael wasn't done revealing truths, and the next one would force Derek to confront whether he was truly sorry or just sorry he had insulted someone powerful. The real test of character was about to begin, and Derek's daughter's life hung in the balance.
Derek started to speak, to apologize again, but Michael held up a hand. He said there was something else Derek needed to know. They returned to the waiting area, away from the curious eyes of passing staff. Michael gestured for Derek to sit, and this time his expression was serious, almost grim. Michael explained that he had been working as an Uber driver for 3 years, but not because he needed the money. He was the sole heir to TechMed Solutions, a company worth billions. But when he had graduated from medical school 5 years ago, instead of joining the family business immediately, he had asked his father for time. He wanted to understand the world beyond the bubble of wealth he had grown up in. He wanted to see how normal people lived, struggled, and survived. He wanted to experience rejection, rudeness, and disrespect, so that when he eventually took over TechMed, he would make decisions with empathy, not just from spreadsheets. His father had agreed on one condition. Michael had to do it completely on his own. No using the family name, no special treatment, no safety net beyond what any other person would have. So Michael had bought a used car with his own money, registered as an Uber driver, and spent 3 years driving people around Chicago. Derek listened, his face growing paler with each word. He understood now why Michael had shown such competence in the crisis, why he spoke with medical terminology, why hospital staff recognized him. This wasn't just a rich kid slumming it. This was someone who had actually earned a medical degree, who had real skills and knowledge, who had chosen to live a humble life to learn something deeper. Michael continued. He said that in 3 years, he had experienced almost every kind of human behavior. He had been treated with kindness by people who had nothing, and with contempt by people who had everything. He had been tipped generously by students barely scraping by, and stiffed by millionaires. He had learned that character had nothing to do with bank account, and everything to do with how you treated people when you thought there were no consequences.
Derek's hands were shaking. He knew where this was going, knew what kind of person he had revealed himself to be. But then Michael's expression shifted, became even more serious. He said there was one more thing, something Derek needed to know about Sarah's condition. Michael revealed that TechMed Solutions had been at the forefront of developing new transplant technologies, including an artificial organ system that was currently in final clinical trials. The system could potentially bridge patients until a donor became available, or, in some cases, replace the need for a donor entirely. Derek's breath caught. He asked if Sarah could be eligible. Michael said that technically, yes, Sarah's condition made her a potential candidate, but the program was highly selective, with hundreds of applicants for only a dozen spots. The selection process was rigorous and based entirely on medical need, prognosis, and likelihood of success. His father had insisted on keeping it merit-based to avoid any appearance of favoritism or corruption. Then Michael dropped the real revelation. He said that he sat on the selection committee, under a different name as part of his medical credentials, but he had a vote. His opinion carried weight. Derek's mind raced. This was it, the moment of opportunity. Michael was telling him this for a reason. Despite everything Derek had said and done, despite the insults and the contempt, Michael was offering Sarah a chance. Derek opened his mouth to beg, to plead, to promise anything, but Michael stopped him with a look. He said that Derek needed to understand something clearly. If Sarah was accepted into the program, it would be because she medically qualified, not because her father had been nice or mean to anyone. It would be because the committee believed she had the best chance of success, not because of any personal relationship. But, Michael continued, there was a complication. Derek's company, MedTech Innovations, had been one of several competitors attempting to develop similar technology. They had failed, their device causing serious complications in trials. But they had been aggressive in their marketing anyway, spreading misinformation about TechMed's system to try to gain market advantage. Derek had been one of the voices in those campaigns. Michael had seen the internal memos, not through any corporate espionage, but because they had been leaked by a whistleblower concerned about patient safety. Derek had approved marketing materials that cast doubt on TechMed's technology, had suggested to doctors that the artificial organ system was unproven and dangerous, all while knowing his own company's device was worse. Derek felt sick. He remembered those meetings, those decisions. At the time, he had justified it as competitive business practice, as doing what he needed to do to succeed. He hadn't thought about the real-world implications, hadn't considered that his misinformation might scare patients away from a treatment that could save their lives. Michael said that several members of the selection committee knew who Derek was and what he had done. If they discovered that Derek's daughter was a candidate, there would be questions. Not about Sarah, she was innocent in all this, but about whether accepting her would appear as favoritism or as Michael trying to manipulate Derek into silence about his identity. The irony wasn't lost on Derek. His own actions, his own ruthless business practices, might now cost his daughter life-saving treatment. Michael said that he would recuse himself from voting on Sarah's case if she applied. He would not use his influence either to help or to hurt her chances. But he wanted Derek to understand the situation clearly. Sarah's best chance was for her application to stand purely on its medical merits, not because of any connection to her father's business dealings or to Michael's identity. That meant Derek had a choice to make. He could keep quiet about meeting Michael, let Sarah's case be judged fairly, or he could try to use this connection, try to leverage what had happened tonight, and potentially ruin Sarah's chances by making the committee question the objectivity of her selection. Derek sat in stunned silence. This was the real test. Michael wasn't offering a deal or making a threat. He was offering Derek a chance to be better than he had been,
to put his daughter's welfare above his own ego and ambition. But there was more. Michael pulled out his phone and showed Derek something. It was a forum, a private medical discussion board where doctors shared information about treatments and technologies. Someone with Derek's email account had been posting there, spreading the same misinformation about TechMed's artificial organ system. That someone was Derek. He had forgotten about those posts, made late at night, after too much wine, driven by competitiveness and spite toward a company he saw as an oppressive monopoly. Michael said that he could have reported these posts months ago, could have exposed Derek's campaign of misinformation. He hadn't, because he believed people deserved chances to be better, to change. But now, with Sarah's life potentially depending on this technology, Derek needed to make a choice about what kind of person he wanted to be.
Would he continue down the path of ruthless ambition, where winning mattered more than truth? Or would he accept that maybe, just maybe, some things were more important than being right, than being successful, than being powerful? Michael wasn't asking Derek to publicly apologize or to sabotage his own career. He was asking something simpler and harder: to stop spreading lies about a treatment that could save lives, including potentially his own daughter's life. Derek felt tears burning in his eyes again, but these were different tears. These were tears of recognition, of seeing himself clearly for the first time in years. He had become the kind of person who would risk other people's health for market share, who would prioritize his career advancement over truth, who would measure his worth by how many people he could look down upon. He thought about Sarah, unconscious in that back seat, her life slipping away. He thought about all the other daughters and sons, mothers and fathers who might be in similar situations. How many of them had he potentially hurt with his misinformation campaign? How many had avoided a treatment that could have saved them because they believed the lies his company had spread? Now Derek faced the ultimate question. Would he choose his pride or his principles, his career or his conscience? And would Michael trust him enough to help guide Sarah toward a treatment that could save her life? Or would Derek's past actions cost his daughter everything? The next decision would define who Derek really was, beneath all the expensive suits and corporate titles.
Derek stood up abruptly, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a long moment, Michael watched him, wondering which way this would go. Would Derek lash out in defensive anger? Would he try to justify his actions? Would he attempt to manipulate the situation to his advantage? Instead, Derek's shoulders sagged. He looked at Michael with an expression of complete defeat, and then said something Michael hadn't expected. He said Michael was right. About everything. Derek started pacing, the words pouring out. He said he had become a person he didn't recognize, someone his younger self would have despised. He had justified every ethical compromise as necessary for success, had told himself that being ruthless in business didn't make him a bad person, that the ends justified the means. But seeing Sarah collapse, feeling utterly helpless despite all his power and money, had shattered that illusion. And now, learning that his own actions might prevent his daughter from getting life-saving treatment, he finally understood the real cost of his choices. He stopped pacing and turned to face Michael directly. He said he would stop the misinformation campaign immediately. He would reach out to the doctors and medical professionals he had contacted and correct the record. He wouldn't mention Michael or this conversation. He would simply say that after reviewing the latest data, he believed he had been wrong about TechMed's technology. More than that, he would resign from MedTech Innovations. He couldn't stay at a company where he had compromised his ethics so thoroughly. He didn't know what he would do next, but he knew he couldn't continue down this path. Michael studied Derek's face, looking for signs of manipulation or false promises, but what he saw was genuine devastation. A man confronting the worst parts of himself and finding them intolerable.
Michael asked if Derek was making these promises just to help Sarah's chances with the program. Derek shook his head. He said that even if Sarah never got into the program, even if this conversation had no bearing on her treatment at all, he still needed to make these changes, because tonight he had been forced to see himself through someone else's eyes, and he couldn't unsee it. He talked about the man he had been in his 20s, before the corporate climb. He had gone into med technology because he wanted to help people, to make healthcare more accessible and effective. But somewhere along the way, he had lost that mission. Success had become an end in and of itself, rather than a means to do good in the world. He said he didn't expect forgiveness from Michael or from anyone else, but he wanted to at least try to be better, starting immediately. Michael sat back down and gestured for Derek to join him. When Derek sat, Michael told him something he hadn't told anyone outside his family. He explained why he had really spent 3 years as an Uber driver. His father, Robert Chen, had built TechMed from nothing, starting in a garage with borrowed equipment. He had always remembered what it was like to struggle, to be dismissed and underestimated. As the company grew successful, he had been terrified that Michael would become the kind of entitled, out-of-touch heir who would destroy everything he had built. So they had made a deal. Michael would spend time in the real world, not as an adventure or a learning exercise, but as a genuine test. His father wanted to know if Michael had the character to lead a company that affected millions of lives, to make decisions that could save or cost people their health, their futures, their lives. Michael said he had learned more in 3 years of driving Uber than in 4 years of medical school. He had learned that dignity wasn't something you earned through achievement. It was something every person deserved simply for being human. He had learned that the measure of a person wasn't what they did when people were watching, but how they treated those who couldn't do anything for them. He had been insulted, dismissed, and treated as invisible by hundreds of people, but he had also been treated with unexpected kindness, been given sincere thanks for small gestures, been included in the human moments of people's lives. He had driven people to funerals and weddings, to job interviews and hospital visits, to moments of joy and moments of grief. And every ride had taught him something about the responsibility he would one day carry. Because TechMed wasn't just a company, it was a force that shaped healthcare. The devices they created, the technologies they developed, the decisions they made about pricing and access, all of it had real consequences for real people. Derek listened, and for the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him. He realized that he had been playing a game, treating business like a competition where the goal was just to win. But Michael understood something deeper, that business was about service, about making the world better, about using success as a platform for good rather than an end in and of itself. Michael checked his phone and said he needed to leave soon. He had other rides scheduled, other passengers waiting. Derek looked at him in disbelief. After everything that had happened, Michael was going back to driving Uber? Michael smiled slightly. He said his 3 years weren't up yet. He had made a commitment to himself and his father, and he intended to keep it. Besides, he still learned something from every ride, every conversation, every person who got into his car. Before he left, Michael gave Derek his card, not his personal card, but a contact for TechMed's patient advocacy program. He said that Sarah should apply through the official channels for the artificial organ program. He reiterated that he would recuse himself from her case, but that she deserved a fair evaluation based on her medical needs. He also said something else, that Derek should spend less time working and more time with Sarah, because all the success in the world meant nothing if you missed the chance to know your own daughter. Derek took the card with trembling hands. He wanted to say so much, to thank Michael for Sarah's life, for this wake-up call, for showing mercy when he deserved none. But Michael was already walking away, back to his Camry, back to his double life as an heir and an Uber driver. Derek stood in the hospital lobby watching through the glass doors as Michael pulled away into the night. Then he turned and walked toward Sarah's room, ready to be the father she deserved. 3 months later, Derek would discover that the real story was just beginning. Michael's mercy had given him a chance to change, but change was harder than a single moment of clarity. And Sarah's case would test whether Derek's transformation was real or just another performance. The final twist would reveal whether redemption was truly possible, or if some sins were too deep to overcome.
3 months had passed since that night. Derek had kept his promises, even when it cost him everything. He had resigned from MedTech Innovations the following Monday, citing personal reasons. His colleagues had been shocked, his boss furious. He had been on track for a promotion to executive vice president, possibly CEO within 5 years. Walking away from that trajectory was professional suicide. He had reached out to every doctor and medical forum where he had spread misinformation about TechMed's artificial organ system. He had written careful, honest retractions, admitting that his previous statements had been driven by competitive bias rather than scientific evidence. He had recommended that medical professionals review the actual clinical data rather than relying on his flawed analysis. The backlash had been immediate and brutal. MedTech Innovations had threatened legal action, claiming that he had violated confidentiality agreements and damaged their market position. Former colleagues had called him a traitor. Industry contacts had stopped returning his calls. His ex-wife had been livid when he told her he had quit his job while Sarah's medical bills were mounting. She had accused him of having a mental breakdown, of being selfish and irresponsible. Their already strained relationship had deteriorated further. But Derek had also done something he hadn't done in years. He had been present. He had rearranged his life around Sarah's needs, attending every doctor's appointment, learning the details of her condition, sitting with her through treatments. He had rediscovered his daughter, learning about her love of photography, her sharp sense of humor, her dreams of becoming a teacher. Sarah had been accepted into TechMed's artificial organ program. Derek had never mentioned his connection to Michael, had never tried to use that night as leverage. Sarah's application had been submitted through official channels, evaluated by the medical committee, and approved based purely on her condition and prognosis. The procedure had been scheduled for today. Derek sat in the surgical waiting room, his hands clasped between his knees, praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. Sarah's mother, Jennifer, sat across from him, her face tight with anxiety. Their relationship had thawed slightly as they united in concern for their daughter. She had apologized for her earlier anger about his job, admitting that she had been scared and lashing out. He had apologized for years of absence and neglect. Hours passed. Derek couldn't eat, couldn't focus on his phone or the magazines scattered on the waiting room tables. He just sat, waiting, hoping, praying. Finally, a doctor emerged. Derek recognized her from the selection committee meetings. He had researched every member extensively after Sarah was accepted. She was Dr. Patricia Moore, one of the lead surgeons on the artificial organ program. Dr. Moore's expression was neutral as she approached, and Derek's heart stopped. But then she smiled, and the tension broke. The surgery had been successful. Sarah had tolerated the procedure well, and the artificial organ system was functioning perfectly. She would need months of recovery and adjustment, regular monitoring, and continued medication, but her prognosis was excellent. She would live. She would thrive. Derek's knees buckled, and he had to sit down abruptly. Jennifer was crying, thanking Dr. Moore over and over. Derek couldn't speak, could barely breathe. His daughter was going to be okay. Dr. Moore said Sarah would be in the recovery for several hours, but they could see her briefly once she was awake. She started to leave, then paused and turned back to Derek. She said that someone had asked her to deliver a message. Derek's heart rate spiked. He knew who that someone was. Dr. Moore said that a member of the committee wanted Derek to know that Sarah's acceptance had been unanimous. Her case had been compelling purely on medical grounds, and every committee member had voted in favor. The person who had recused themselves had made the right call. There had been no appearance of favoritism, no questions about the integrity of the selection process. Derek understood. Michael had kept his word. He had stepped aside and let Sarah's case be judged fairly, and she had earned her place in the program through her medical needs, not through any connection.
But there was more. Dr. Moore said this person also wanted Derek to know that they were proud of him, that they had seen the retractions he had posted, the corrections he had made, that they believed people could change, and Derek had proven it was true. Derek felt tears streaming down his face, and he didn't bother to wipe them away. He thanked Dr. Moore, his voice breaking, and she nodded with understanding before leaving them alone. 2 hours later, Derek stood beside Sarah's hospital bed, holding her hand while she slept. She looked peaceful, no longer gray and struggling. The machines around her beeped steadily, monitoring the artificial organ system that was keeping her alive. Jennifer had gone to get coffee, leaving Derek alone with his daughter. He studied her face, seeing the child she had been and the woman she was becoming. He thought about all the moments he had missed while chasing success, all the school plays and parent-teacher conferences and bedtime stories he had sacrificed for his career. He couldn't get those moments back, but he could make sure he was present for all the moments ahead. Sarah stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She saw her father and smiled weakly. Her voice was hoarse when she asked if the surgery had worked. Derek told her everything had gone perfectly. He squeezed her hand gently and told her she was going to be okay, that she was strong and brave, and he was so proud of her. Sarah's smile widened slightly. Then she said something that made Derek's heart ache. She said that she was glad her dad was there, that in the past he had always been too busy for things like this. But lately he had been different, present, more like the dad she remembered when she was little. Derek promised her he would never be too busy for her again, that he had learned what truly mattered, and it wasn't job titles or corner offices or professional achievements. It was this, being there for the people you loved, showing up when it mattered. Sarah drifted back to sleep, exhausted from the surgery. Derek continued to hold her hand, keeping his vigil. His phone buzzed with the message, unknown number. Derek opened it carefully. The message was simple. Your daughter is strong. So are you. Keep being the person you've become. M. Derek stared at the message for a long time. Michael had been watching, had known about Sarah's surgery, had cared enough to send encouragement. This man, whom Derek had treated with such contempt, had shown him more grace than he deserved. He typed a response, then deleted it. What could he possibly say that would be adequate? Instead, he sent just 2 words. Thank you. 3 dots appeared immediately, showing that Michael was typing. Then a final message appeared. Pay it forward. Derek understood. Michael wasn't asking for gratitude or recognition. He was asking Derek to take what he had learned and use it to make the world better, to treat others with the dignity he had failed to show that night. He looked at his sleeping daughter, at the second chance he had been given. He thought about the man he had been and the man he wanted to become. He had no job, uncertain career prospects, and a long road ahead. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path.
6 months after the surgery, Derek stood in the lobby of a community center on Chicago's South Side. The building was old but well-maintained, filled with the sounds of children playing and adults in conversation. This was about as far from his former corner office as he could get. He was here for an interview, but not for a corporate position. After months of soul-searching and financial struggle, Derek had decided to start over completely. He had taken his savings, considerably depleted by medical bills and living expenses without a salary, and enrolled in a certification program for patient advocacy and medical ethics. The director of the community center, Maria Rodriguez, was interviewing him for a position as a patient advocate. The role would involve helping underserved communities navigate the complex healthcare system,
assisting patients in understanding their options and advocating for their rights. The salary was a fraction of what he had earned before. Maria was tough, asking pointed questions about his background and motivations. She had clearly researched him, knew about his resignation from MedTech Innovations, and wasn't impressed by his corporate credentials. She asked him directly, why should she believe he genuinely cared about helping people when his entire career had been about profit margins and market share? Derek answered honestly. He told her about the night his daughter almost died, about the Uber driver who had saved her life and shown him what real character looked like. He didn't mention Michael's name or connection to TechMed. He had kept that confidence, as promised. But he told her about seeing himself clearly for the first time, about realizing he had become someone he was ashamed of. He told her about the months since, about learning to live on less, about discovering what actually brought him satisfaction. He admitted that he still struggled sometimes with ego and impatience, that unlearning years of toxic corporate thinking wasn't easy. But he also told her about the patients he had already helped during his certification practicum. He had used his knowledge of the healthcare industry, the insurance loopholes, the financial assistance programs, the clinical trial opportunities to help people who had nowhere else to turn. He had discovered that the skills he had once used to maximize profits could also be used to help people access care they desperately needed. Maria listened, her expression unreadable. When Derek finished, she sat back in her chair and studied him for a long moment. Then she said something unexpected. She said she had received a call 3 days ago from someone at TechMed Solutions, a doctor who served on their patient advocacy board. This doctor had given Derek a glowing recommendation, describing him as someone who had shown remarkable personal growth and genuine commitment to making amends for past mistakes. Derek's breath caught. Michael had vouched for him, even after all this time, even without being asked? Maria said she normally didn't put much stock in recommendations from corporate executives, but something about this one had struck her as genuine. The doctor had been clear that Derek wasn't perfect, that he still had work to do, but that he deserved a chance to prove he had changed. She offered him the position with a warning. The work would be hard, often frustrating, and never glamorous. He would see the worst of the healthcare system, the ways it failed the most vulnerable. He would have to fight battles he might not win, advocate for patients who might not survive. Derek accepted immediately. This was exactly where he needed to be. That evening, Derek picked up Sarah from her photography class. She had recovered remarkably well from the surgery, back to her regular activities with only minor restrictions. The artificial organ system had given her a future she hadn't dared to hope for. They went to dinner at a modest restaurant, nothing fancy. Sarah talked excitedly about a photo essay she was working on, portraits of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. She had become passionate about telling stories of resilience and courage in everyday life. Derek listened, really listened, asking questions and engaging with her enthusiasm. These moments, the simple ritual of dinner with her daughter, the privilege of hearing about her dreams, had become the most valuable part of his life. Sarah paused in her story and looked at her father seriously. She said she was proud of him, that she knew the last 6 months hadn't been easy, but he had become someone she looked up to. Derek felt his eyes sting with tears. He thanked her, his voice thick with emotion. Then Sarah said something else. She said she had figured out something about the night of her surgery, about the Uber driver who had helped them. She had overheard enough conversations, pieced together enough details to realize that the driver had been someone important, someone connected to the hospital and the artificial organ program. Derek's heart raced, wondering how much she knew. Sarah said she didn't need to know the details, but she understood that the driver had shown her father a kind of mercy and grace that had changed everything. She wanted her father to know that she saw the change, appreciated it, and loved the person he had become. Derek reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. He told her that she was right, that the driver had given him a gift more valuable than money or success, the chance to become a better person, to be the father she deserved.
He promised her that he would spend the rest of his life honoring that gift by treating others the way he should have that night, with respect, dignity, and compassion, regardless of who they were or what they could do for him. They finished their dinner, father and daughter, rebuilding a relationship that had nearly been lost. Outside, the city lights glowed in the darkness, millions of people living their lives, facing their struggles, deserving their dignity. Somewhere out there, Michael was probably still driving his Uber, still learning from every passenger, still preparing to lead a company with empathy and wisdom. Derek hoped their paths would cross again someday, so he could properly thank the man who had saved not just his daughter's life, but his soul. But whether they met again or not, Derek had learned the lesson that Michael had taught him. Every person mattered. Every interaction was an opportunity to show your true character. And success without compassion was just another form of failure. He had been given the second chance, and he intended to make the most of it, not by climbing back to the top of the corporate ladder, but by helping others climb out of the valleys of desperation and despair. As they walked to the car, Sarah asked her father if he was happy, truly happy, despite having less money and a less impressive job title than before. Derek didn't hesitate. He said he was happier than he had been in years, maybe ever, because he had finally learned what actually mattered, and he was building a life around those values. Sarah smiled and linked her arm through his. They walked together into the evening, two people who had been given the gift of more time, more chances, more opportunities to get it right. And in that moment, Derek understood something profound. The ride that had seemed like his lowest point had actually been his salvation. The man he had tried to diminish had lifted him up. The night he had thought would ruin him had remade him into someone worth being.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.